In this lesson, I'd like to show you how to carve this pattern into your basswood. Okay, it's a very simple pattern with only a few back-to-back chips, a few larger chips, and it moves along quite quickly. Okay, this pattern, as you can see, has been done on all four sides of this toothpick holder, and I'm going to show you how to do that right now. I've already carved out one of these on my practice board here, and I started by drawing the lines across my board, the straight lines here and the straight lines up and down to the dimensions that I have on the outside of my pattern. Then I took my pattern and I put it onto my board and I traced around it 4 times across the board. There's nothing fancy about this pattern. It's just made from a piece of tag board cut out with an X-Acto knife to the size that I want. So after I've laid out the pattern on my board, a couple of tips to remember: do your larger chips first and always carve away from your previous chips. And as we do this next one here, I'll show you a couple of things also on how I decide which cut to make first. Start with, on this piece, I'm going to carve this out now. The grain of our wood runs in this direction, and I want to carve away from my previous chips. So my first cuts will be right on this line, away from my previous chips. There's the deep part of the chip, so I got a little more depth, and I'll draw my knife out as I come down to the center. And I can just continue down very shallow and gets deeper right at the end. Alright, next I'm going to work on these chips here. There's my depth on my cut, and draw your knife out to the center. I'll turn my board again. I'm going to take this chip out right from here. There's the depth of the chip again. I'm going to come all the way up to the center. Okay? If there's any bit left down in the center of your chip, way down deep, just go back in with the same position with your knife and take it out. Okay, so there's the first chip. I'm going to come up and do this one now. Start right in the center, very shallow. There's the deep part of the chip, and draw the knife out right to there. Everything on this design is done in the first position with your knife. Review that lesson if you need to. There's the deep part right to there, and my chip comes right out. Okay, the next ones that I'll work on, I'm going to carve these, take these 2 chips out. They're the bigger chips. Now notice the grain direction on the wood for these. Okay, it's running this direction again. Okay, I'm going to take this inside curve cut first on both of these chips, and I'll explain to you why as I do it. Okay, so here's going to be my first cut. Okay, and there's my depth. Turn the board and I'll take out this other side of the chip. There's the deep part, and then draw it out to make your curve. And finally, this side of my chip. Okay, now if it doesn't come out on your first try, usually where it will be holding up is on the cross grain cut. Okay, so I go back in and it pops it right out. Okay, now the reason I take this cut first is because with the grain direction, if I left it to the last cut, when I went deep here and came around the corner, it's going to start to lift out on me with the grain, and I might get a bit of a ragged edge on the inside of my chip. So instead of that, I'll take that cut first to avoid it lifting ahead of my cut. You'll learn this as you keep doing more and more chip carving. There's my second cut. And finally, the third. Okay. Okay, so those 4 chips have been removed. I'll start working on the opposite side now. Again, I'm going to take my inside curve cuts first. Okay, and now these 2 larger chips on the outside. Okay, I'm going to start on this long with the grain cut here. For the same reason I just mentioned before, I don't want it to be my last cut with the grain, because then it tends to lift out ahead of my cut. Okay, if it doesn't come out, remember what I mentioned, it's probably you're across the grain cut. Just go back in, and it just hung up right in there across the grain. All that remains are these back here. I'm going to do the larger, longer ones first. And these are not too big, so you don't have to go very deep. Again, I took the with the grain cut right up the middle first. Little depth in the middle is all you need. Now the other side, carve away from your previous chip. And finally, these small chips across here. Don't go too deep, because they're little tiny chips. Okay, got a little bit left in there. Always clean up after you've made your chips if there's any little pieces remaining down the bottom. And that's all there is to it to carve this pattern. I would repeat this across my remaining chips, and pretty soon, before you know it, carve out a wonderful little toothpick holder just like this.